And Jeff, you're right here.
We're live, Jeff.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Industrial Strength Podcast, where I don't know what the hell we're doing again. It's a podcast more focused on industrial strength fire departments and the industrial hazmat response. My name is something, I don't even know what it is anymore, and I'm a hazmat technician with 20 years of experience in the fire department industry. Oh, hell. You know, once again is Randy and Steve. Fucking take it away, damn it. Hey, and by the way, you know what this sound means?
It sounds like a coffee grinder.
It means I'm not at home and internet fucking sucks, so.
We'll bear with that.
That's right. I'm Steve, a hazmat technician with 3 years of experience on the industrial response team and 10 plus years of experience in industrial manufacturing.
My name is Randy, hazmat specialist. I have 17 years on the industrial fire department, starting out doing hazmat.
So what are we talking about today?
Oh,
let's get this pain out of the way. We're talking about peroxide-forming chemicals.
Yeah. So tell me about it, Jeff.
I don't know what you want me to tell about.
Well,
apparently, my end is pretty shitty, so.
All right, I'll tell you. How about I'll take it away then. So let's give an overview for people who may not be aware peroxide solids are. So I know at our facility we have chemicals that either are peroxides, contain peroxides, or the ability to generate peroxides. So what we're talking about mainly is peroxide-forming chemicals. So ones that aren't peroxides themselves but can form them over time. So peroxide-forming chemicals are a class of compounds that can form shock-sensitive explosive peroxide crystals, which is a problem, right? A problem in industry, problem in academia, so like colleges and stuff. So many organic solvents that are commonly used in labs and industrial facilities have the potential to form explosive peroxide crystals, which makes it a problem. Specifically, diethyl ether and THF are two of the more common peroxide-forming chemicals that get used today.
Hey, Randy, do they actually explode? Or
they
is that
can.
for another episode?
Oh, we're going to save those for episode number 2.
So, I think we may have witnessed that at one point.
We have. So we've had some incidents in our past, but we're going to talk about that. This is actually going to be a 2-part episode where part 1 is more academic, talking about the issues and the chemicals themselves, and episode 2 we're going to talk about what happens when you F around and find out.
I like
That's our expertise.
That's right. That's how we do it best. We get right down to it. F around and find out. But so either way, peroxide solids, it's extremely important that you follow safety procedures regarding sampling and disposal times. Otherwise, you're going to unintentionally get peroxide solids and build up, and that's how you're going to catch those explosions.
Hey, Steve, can you give us a definition of a peroxide?
Absolutely, Jeff. Peroxide is a chemical that contains a peroxo, an OO unit, and that is one that has a chemical formula of O2. I believe to the is it to the
Steve,
negative?
What is that OO?
Yeah,
what is that
it's like
OO
negative
stand for?
2. It means it's what?
Sorry, Jeff. What's that?
What does that OO stand for?
That means there's 2 O's to the negative there, Jeff.
Yeah. No, it's 2 oxygens bonded together. So, which just looks stupid when it's like written
out.
Kind
of like H2O, but without the H.
Yeah. That's also karma biting me in the ass too. So.
But these are also shock-sensitive compounds that can explode if they're subject to mechanical shock, intense light, rapid changes in temperature, or heat.
I'm pretty sure if you look at it or call it names, it blows up too.
Well, I think that's more like Jeff, but...
Oh, okay. Real different.
So, under normal storage conditions, peroxide-forming chemicals have potential to generate and accumulate peroxide crystals. Those may be violently detonated, depending on the conditions they're in.
Yeah.
That's when they're subjected to... Exactly. So that's when they're subjected to thermal or mechanical shock, and those peroxides are formed under certain conditions.
Yeah,
so
what are
if I'm
those
not
conditions,
mistaken,
man?
there's 4 conditions, right, Jeff?
I believe you're correct, Steve. What are those 4 conditions?
Well, I was kind of hoping you'd answer that for us, Jeff.
All right, well, I can give you the 4 conditions. Maybe you can go into more depth on those. That would be oxygen, time, heat and concentration on the heat, and the light.
That is
Randy,
correct.
why don't you go into a little bit more into that?
Yeah, no worries. So some chemicals that form peroxide solids, like they require oxygen to degrade and convert, and so access to oxygen is critical. So anytime you expose it to ambient air, it gets the oxygen it needs, so the more oxygen it can actually grab onto, the higher your chance of forming peroxides. Time is exactly what it is, man. Sometimes it's a slow degradation or slow formation process. We're going to learn here shortly that there's different routes for different chemicals for the formation of a peroxide. And so sometimes time is a factor. You need a certain amount of time. We're going to talk about timetables and time frames here in a while. And then
Speaking
heat
of
and
timing.
concentration. Yeah?
No, just say, speaking of timing,
Speaking of timing. Then heat and concentration, also important. Sometimes you won't get the peroxides to form solids until you actually heat it up or condense it down to a more dense version of itself. And then light, sometimes you need UV light to actually initiate a chemical reaction that forms the peroxides. So those are
So
the 4
kind of like
factors,
when
man.
Jeff goes in that tanning bed?
That's right. That UV light does it all. It's magic.
I got nothing for that, man. I'm fucking white as a ghost.
Whatever, man. Don't talk to me Mr. September on the calendar. I don't want to hear nothing.
I was outside for 10 minutes today and got a frickin' sunburn.
It's called a base tan. It's different.
No, it's called. In about another day, I'm gonna start frickin' peeling. All right. So some of the factors that affect the rate of peroxide formation include exposure to the air, the amount of light, like Randy said, and the heat and moisture exposure. You know, and then the contamination from metals. Manufacturers may also add an inhibitor to the peroxide forming chemicals to counter the peroxide formation. What do they add, Randy?
BHT, which is really interesting. So BHT is shorthand for butylated hydroxytoluene, but BHT is a preservative. You'll also find it in food as well because it works the same way. It's a preservative. So when we're talking about peroxide formers, it inhibits the growth of peroxide, but in food it's used as a preservative because it
So what kind of food
scavenges
do they put that
oxygen.
in?
What's that?
What kind of food do they put that in?
A lot of things, man. So if it's a processed meat product, I would bet you dollars to donuts. If you look at the label, it's going to say BHT on it. Because
Oh, wow.
once again, it scavenges oxygen and prevents it from going rancid. So things like meats, oils, things that will contain oils, you want to prevent oxygen from getting to it because it's going to make that whatever oil's in it turn rancid and taste gross. So BHT is added into a lot of products to prevent that oxygen from making things go bad.
So just
All right,
based on
so-
the fact that it's got toluene in the name, any of the good smelling foods.
Right, yeah, no doubt.
Well, yes, Randy's already gone through the BHT now. Holy heck. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. So
But-
let's talk about, I think I alluded to different classes of peroxide formers, right? I said that peroxides will
That
form
is correct.
different
So
ways.
kind of
why
like
don't we-
those different circumstances which they form, isn't there also 4 different classes?
Yes, and each one is distinctly different, man. It's like 4 separate cousins. Each one's got its own personality, acts differently. So,
4 separate cousins. All right. Anyway, continue. I'm not going to bite on that one.
all right, fair enough.
I think you already bit it.
The 4 different categories are actually called classes. So Class A through Class D for peroxide formers. And each one goes back to basically how that chemical makes peroxides. So like Class A peroxide formers are chemicals that spontaneously decompose. They don't need help, man. They don't need light. They don't need oxygen. They don't need concentration or heat. They'll do it on their own. They contain all the materials to themselves, and they'll do it whenever they feel like. And so they'll spontaneously decompose to form explosive peroxide. So Class A is the most dangerous of peroxide formers. And so Group A chemicals present a severe peroxide formation hazard after prolonged storage and exposure to air, and they will have the strictest regimens for time for disposal.
So you're saying they're kind of like those chemists, very dangerous.
Yes, very dangerous and can be explosive, yes.
I think we know one of those, maybe.
Allegedly. There might be one on your team, I don't know. So let's move on to Class B, a little safer than Class A's, but Class B peroxide formers are chemicals that require external energy, so heat or light, to form explosive peroxides. And this is kind of where THF typically falls in. So when you talked about THF, THF is a Class B peroxide former. But in addition to requiring energy, it also requires time. So Class A, I think we're gonna talk about timetables. It's the most stringent. Class B, you get a little more time along with this guy.
Nothing but time.
You mentioned THF there. I think that might be alluding to our next episode in this sequence, right?
Oh, agreed.
Possibly.
We're going to talk about THF quite a bit in our next episode, so that'll be worthwhile to see how a Class B peroxide former works, because we're going to have a case study on that.
Or it doesn't work.
Right, or it doesn't work. It didn't work great for us. Class C peroxide formers, chemicals that are highly reactive and hazardous due to peroxide initiation. So this is weird. So it deals with peroxides, but it doesn't necessarily form peroxides. It has the ability to, and when it does, man, then it really starts ripping on a side reaction. So it's not the peroxide that's the issue, but it's the chemical reaction that peroxide sets off. And so this would be like a polymerization reaction. So it could be a really bad time. But so typically this is what you're going to want to add your BHTs to prevent that polymerization reaction. And once again, we talked about polymerization reactions back in railcar disaster episode. We talked about the vinyl ether as a primary example of a polymerizing reaction. So, and then finally we got Class D, man. Class D is like the...
Hey, that's like me. Still gets degrees.
Right, D's gets degrees. It's any other chemical class. It's peroxide formers that may form peroxides, allegedly, but can't be clearly placed in Class A through C. And so with that one, it's not clear whether it requires heat or light or time. It has the ability to, and it may be kind of sort of someone could think it could form a peroxide, but they're not sure. So it's like a cautionary one. So could do something, but maybe not.
All right, so for all these, I'm going to just classify me as a pea brain. You buy your hydrogen peroxide from the store. Where does that fall in here? Is that anywhere near what we're talking about?
No, unfortunately not, because hydrogen peroxide you buy from the store. That's right. The peroxide you buy from the store is more like 3%, right? So we're talking about concentrations now, right? And
right.
So,
You're talking about 90% concentration, correct?
Of peroxides?
Correct.
Yeah. So the stuff you buy at the store is just 3%, but stuff in industry can be a lot more.
Let's say that 50 to 80% peroxide that's typically used in industrial settings. What class would that probably fall under?
Man, I don't know. I would say that's like A. Be very careful, throw that stuff away, or maybe depends on what type of peroxide it is. Class C, you need to be weary and add some inhibitor to this stuff. So it would probably fall in Class C. Only because it's already a peroxide, you need to add an inhibitor to prevent it from running away and doing terrible things to you. Where Class A isn't a peroxide necessarily, but forms peroxides easily.
Oh, so it identifies as a peroxide.
It identifies as a peroxide, yes. You can't question it.
But regardless of which class it falls under, there are still some ideal storage conditions that kind of fall for all of those formers, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, Steve.
There is.
Do you remember what it is offhand?
Yeah, it's cool, dry places. They need to be in tightly closed containers. They need to be marked clearly for those pea-brains like Jeff and myself that might accidentally mix them with something else. And then you talk about things like moisture, light, air. Those should all be delegated, try and mitigate those circumstances. And then one other big thing is, especially when you're getting in bulk storage, like 55-gallon drums, you do not want these to be on wooden pallets.
No doubt, yeah, man, because peroxides will just react with anything organic. You're right. So I would love to say that we don't do any of those things where we work.
But I think we do them all, actually.
But I would hate to say that I've seen every single one of those circumstances.
Right, but it's all a learning event, right? You find the mistake, you F around and find out, and then you got to figure it out, how to not do it next time.
Again, that's what we do best.
Yeah, no doubt. We find it the hard way to fix it.
Trial by error.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, let's say we do get a call, right? So you get called out. And at our facility, I think we talked about this a little bit. We're a mixed-use facility where we're not just industrial. We're industrial and labs, right? So we have laboratory spaces as well. And so there are occasions where we're called out to investigate things that just don't look right? So think about like an odor investigation, but it's more like a visual investigation of something someone doesn't think looks right. So sometimes we get called out to do those things, right? And so we have to do something called a hazard analysis, right? So where we need to look at the material, kind of do an evaluation, figure out if there's a hazard, and if so, how serious that hazard is. So in order to do that, we need to do a couple things. So visually, we need to look for a couple things. And, Jeff and Steve, back me up if maybe I'm wrong, but first we want to make sure that the material does not appear to be degraded or contaminated, right? So we don't want to see chunks of something else in there that shouldn't be in there. So that's first and foremost. We also want to make sure that we're not... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's assuming that you can see into the container clearly.
Right, because peroxide-formers, if you're talking like lab setting or industrial storage, you might have a metal drum, you can't see it. In lab settings, it might be a dark amber colored bottle, so it might...
And that's where the issue is going to be. You have to look through that amber into the light and almost see if you have solids in there.
Right, yeah. So, and then next thing, we need to determine whether the material appears to be discolored, right? And that might not be determined at all. Right, that one might not be possible at all.
You got to know what your main reagent is to know that.
Right. Yes. That's true, because sometimes you'll get something stored in, like the one thing I can think of is potassium t-butoxide, which is like a weird base. And that stuff will crystallize readily, and you got to make sure that crystal is the base and not like a peroxide solid. It can be very puckery to try and do that evaluation.
Funny. That is probably why we call it potty butt on site.
That would be a true story.
Factor.
So, other things you want to look out for is deterioration or distortion of the storage container, right? So, especially if something's degrading, we know that it can sometimes produce off-gassing, which can pressurize containers.
Which is a little bit easier to see on like a bulk container. So
yeah, a drum for sure, yeah. Because it'll get the top and bottom going. Other things we want to look for is gross contamination. We want to make sure that, once again, the container itself looks to be in good shape, including the cap. Because if we're talking like a glass bottle, typically it's got a plastic cap. We want to make sure that that is okay, the plastic cap, because once again, introducing oxygen like through a broken cap could be a problem for us. The other thing we want to look at for sure is the age of the material, right? Because everything is going to have a standard storage time. And so if it's extended
we keep
past
everything for short periods, right?
That's right.
Short time.
Yeah, so that's going to create a problem. And so, like I said, we're going to do this hazard analysis. We want to look for those couple things to begin with, right? So, but other things we need to remember is that peroxides are less volatile than solvents. So solvents are going to off-gas first over peroxides, because peroxides typically don't have a high vapor pressure. And when we're talking about peroxide solids, solids don't typically have any vapor pressure. So that's a problem. But other things to note is that experiments, so when we're doing this evaluation, we want to make sure we don't really open the cap on things without doing a proper evaluation looking for crystals. because experiments have determined that a percentage of 0.008%, which is really 80 parts per million or greater, is enough to initiate an explosive decomposition. Meaning, if you open up something that's got the crystals, it could blow up on you.
Boom.
Yeah, exactly. And so whatever flammable solvent, if it's THF, for example, is just going to turn into a firebomb for you. Not super great. So go slow and be very observant about what you're doing. Because remember, peroxides are sensitive to heat, friction, and shock. So opening a cap might be enough friction and heat to set off any solids you might not see within the threads of the cap.
Slow. What's this definition you mean? I've always been told the faster is better.
I don't know, man. We're very Leroy Jenkins where we go, but this is one of those cases you can't be doing that, man. You do that, and it's a problem. And it would be almost like you had a mercury call and you ran right into it without saying it's a mercury call. You know what I'm saying?
I wonder if any of our listeners out there might be getting a meaning here.
Yeah. So,
yeah, at least I got my boots back from that one.
I know. So Steve,
that was a couple episodes ago.
You knocked your boots right off,
didn't you?
So Steve, what should we do? So, like, if you think you got a peroxide container, something that's got peroxides on it, how do you think you'd evaluate that?
So if you think or know for a fact that there's some peroxide formers in that container, the first thing you want to make sure of is that you do not remove that container from the storage location that it's in until a thorough evaluation has been performed.
I don't think you emphasize that enough.
That's true. Do not touch or you go boom.
Right. It only takes one mistake to learn the hard way on this one.
It's called the KISS method.
Yeah, no doubt.
The kiss of death, yes.
Yeah.
So for these instances, the Hazmat team is the most appropriate and scientific authority to consider the assessment for those potential forming chemicals and do a thorough evaluation before having them safely transported away from whichever storage location they're in, whether it be a lab setting or a production floor.
Right. I would agree, because like in our setting, while we have labs and we have scientists, not all scientists are aware of the dangers associated with peroxide. So typically, if you have a hazmat team, let them handle it. Typically, they'll kind of know what to do, how to do it, and they'll have the tests available to do it.
Yep. So materials from those potential peroxide-forming compounds, which we actually have a kind of in-depth list on our site. I don't know if everyone out there necessarily does, but they can be approved for transportation and disposal if certain conditions are met. And Jeff, what conditions are those?
Well, Steve, thanks for asking. The container is unopened and the contents are unexpired.
Right.
Well, that could be a chore, but all right. The container has been opened and the contents are unexpired, or there is no expiration date, but the date of manufacture is present and the compounds fall within the acceptance parameters for recommended storage time. Mm-hmm. That's a mouthful.
Not the first time you said that.
The inner container has been confirmed unopened, which is sealed and intact. God, I wish I would have put my phone on vibrate. Contains an inhibitor. The contents are expired, but the container is less than 3 years old, and none of the conditions exist. The compound is a solid peroxide former, potassium metal, potassium amide, sodium amide, and I can't pronounce that. I really can't.
Sodium ethoxyacetylide.
Yep, that one.
Yeah, that one.
Make sure it is not discolored and has not formed a crust on the surface. That's actually the key to that, is to make sure it doesn't form a crust.
Yeah, because we performed evaluations where that crust has been present at the cap. But it turned out it was not peroxide. So once again, very important to look for that.
And finally, lab personnel can confirm testing of peroxides were the result of less than 8 part per million, and the testing falls within the time frames for the groups.
Right, yeah. So, Steve, talking about those time frames, right, and I alluded to it earlier when we talked about the different classes. Man, can you tell us about what those time frames for storage are for the different classes of chemical for a peroxide former?
Yep, so much like you alluded to, it kind of goes shortest duration for those most volatile ones. So we'll start from the Class Ds and work our way up. Class D is about a year, roughly. Class Cs also fall under that same category if they are an inhibited chemical. But if they're uninhibited, those actually fall under 24 months. So sometimes those Cs can be a little longer than the Ds. And then Class A's are a 3-month period.
Yeah. So Class A will be the most stringent, right, at 3 months, which is like a really short turn time. It's almost like very hand-to-mouth use, and if you don't use it, you got to get rid of it.
So in a lot of cases, I think it's kind of that fact of the hand-to-mouth. We don't actually see it get to the destination until it's almost at the end of that point.
Yeah. Yep. So right. So Class A would be the most stringent, 3 months, and then like B and D, 12-month. C, if it's inhibited, can also be 12-month. If it's not inhibited, zoinks. And once again, that is the runaway reaction. Polymerizing reaction. So if you have anything with that, and that's also like super stringent too. I think you said 24 month, but I think you meant like 24 hour on that one because that's really short.
That would be correct. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you can keep it for 24 months, but it's not going to work out great.
I'm just speaking from our experience on site.
But yeah, I have to flare off a rail car or something. I don't know. Just allegedly.
Or call in some sort of unit that can make it explode in a safe manner.
Right, funsies. The way to spend a weekend.
Again, teaser for next week.
Right, exactly, yeah. So, you know what, guys? I think maybe this point might be a good point in breaking. I think we're going to talk about a little more in depth next week is we're going to talk about visual inspections. We have some examples of visual inspections. And we're going to talk about testing methods. And then we got some case studies to go over too. Well, we're kind of reaching up to our half-hour mark that we'd like to keep at. And I don't want to run too far over because we still got a whole bunch of good stuff to talk about, including examples of peroxide solids, examples of how to test for it. And I don't want to go too far over. But what do you guys think?
I believe we have some great pictures for that. So I think we should definitely keep that for next week.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And although I think we've had some really good subject matter so far, I think it's going to get even better next week.
Yeah, visuals make it all better. Oh my gosh,
man. I can't believe it's going to get any better, but I can't wait.
Better.
Is that with 5 or 6 R's?
It's definitely 6. Definitely.
I think that's 4. I think that was 4 R's, but.
But so, you know what? What I'd like to hear from listeners is, has anyone out in our audience had any experiences dealing with peroxide formers, right? I'm sure people deal with the common solvents, THF, any sort of IPA is actually rated as a peroxide former, any sort of ether is a peroxide former. Let me know. I would like to know if anyone's had any related calls to peroxide formers and how they've dealt with it. But
and Jeff,
Steve,
how can they reach out on that?
You can reach us at hazmatharder@gmail.com.
Right. And so next week, stay tuned. We'll have some visuals. We'll talk about visual inspections, what you might see, what it looks like, and how to test for peroxides. And then
everybody loves pictures.
Picture are the best part of anything.
That's right. What's better than one episode on peroxides? I believe that's 2 episodes.
Right. All right. So thank you everybody for tuning in.
And Hazmat Harder till next time.
Hazmat Harder.